Hello and welcome. I'm your host, Neil Howard, here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you so much for joining us. In this segment, we're going to have a conversation with Dr. Richard Woodman. He's joining us here as Chief Clinical Officer, Oncology Business Group at Eisai. He's going to discuss some notable presentations on the Antibody-Drug Conjugate co-developed by Eisai and Bristol Myers Squibb that was presented at the 2022 American Society of Clinical Oncology annual meeting. Welcome to Health Professional Radio, Dr. Richard Woodman. Thank you for taking the time with us this evening.
It's my pleasure, Neil. I look forward to our conversation.
Tell us a bit about the data for Eisai's antibody-drug conjugate presented at this year's ASCO, if you would.
Yes, it'd be my pleasure. Thank you. We had two significant abstracts that were shared at ASCO general meeting earlier in June, and they both focused on two different aspects of what we call MORAb 202, or its actual name now is farletuzumab ecteribulin. And so we frequently just go with farletuzumab to shorten that and make it easier for everyone. The first abstract was very important results from a phase 1 study that was conducted in Japan. And it was a phase 1 study that involved 45 patients. And in that study, we looked at various doses, which is classic objective for a phase 1 study, for the antibody-drug conjugate. And we then looked at additional patients in two doses in particular that we felt had the best clinical risk benefit. And it was the results from that study that draw a lot of attention at the meeting. And I think they demonstrated in a population of women who had high-grade ovarian carcinoma and had failed platinum therapies. Now, this is the typical first-line therapy that patients with ovarian cancer get. Unfortunately, it's very common that the responses can be very limited in patients to the first-line platinum therapy. And so many companies and researchers are looking for alternative options of treatment for these patients. And in our case, we've been studying farletuzumab for some time now as a potential option for patients who have failed their first line of therapy with platinum. Farletuzumab is a very interesting drug, and it's becoming in a class of drugs that are gaining tremendous use and notoriety in the medical oncology field because of their efficacy. Farletuzumab has really three components. One is an antibody that's directed at a very special molecule common in patients with ovarian cancer, and this sits on the surface of cancer cells, and it's called folate receptor alpha. And farletuzumab recognizes that, but in addition, it has a second molecule that's conjugated, as we described, to the antibody, and that is erbilin. This is a compound that Eisai has developed for some years now. It's been shown to be effective in a number of cancers. But what is different is the delivery, using an antibody to target the erbilin to a very specific location where the cancer cells are. And when that targeting happens, erbilin is released from what we call a cleavable linker, and it then has a cytotoxic effect on the cancer cells. Mm-hmm. That's its primary mechanism of action. But like many drugs, including this class of ADCs, there's these secondary mechanisms of action that are equally important, we're learning. And they are mechanisms that involve enhancement of the immune response. And so you have an antibody that has multiple mechanisms of action, and it is this that we're very excited about. Now, farletuzumab is not the first ADC. There are the last time I checked, 11 approved, and they are used in a variety of cancers, again, using the same sort of approach, having an antibody target a chemotherapy drug to increase the exposure to the cancer cells.
Are the safety and efficacy results similar to other ADCs or better?
Well, I think that farletuzumab is along with one other antibody-drug conjugate that is being explored in ovarian cancer. There are other tumors we're interested in, and the basis for the tumors in our particular case is the expression of this folate receptor alpha. The other approved ADCs target various cancers, and again, it's all dependent on what their antibody is directed to. Right now, we were very encouraged by the preliminary results from this phase 1 study, and that has led us and BMS to expand our program into other tumors as well as expand the program in ovarian carcinoma.
So would you say that you're on the verge of fulfilling the unmet need for patients living with platinum-resistant ovarian cancer, or PROC?
Right. Well, I think on the verge is difficult to define, but there's still a lot of work to do through our clinical research. But this mechanism has the potential to provide a new therapeutic option for women who have failed platinum who have ovarian cancer.
What's next for this treatment as trials move forward?
Well, I think what's next is what the second abstract at ASCO demonstrated. And the what next in that abstract was, how do we define the optimal dose or administration of our particular antibody, farletuzumab? There are a number of approaches that can be used to administer antibody-drug conjugates. And in our particular case, what we've learned is that instead of dosing by body weight, we found that the clinical benefit and risks are optimal if we do what's called body surface area dosing, which is not uncommon in oncology for oncology products. And by doing that, we have the ability to minimize the most common and serious safety concern with farletuzumab, which is something known as interstitial lung disease. And this is a significant safety event that we have to mitigate against and have various methods to reduce the incidence and treatment of it if, in fact, it occurs. And so the farletuzumab, this adverse event is common with a number of other ADCs, and it seems to be, in part, I think, a class effect for ADCs that they can affect the lung in some cases. And I think that's the most important what next, is determining the optimal dosing approach with farletuzumab. And Neil, defining the optimal dose and route of administration and approach to dosing is one of the hardest things in drug development. And it must be done early and established with confidence that we have a dose that's optimal for efficacy and minimizes to the best of the drug's ability safety. And so that's what we're most immediately concerned with. We think that based on the abstract we shared at ASCO, we think we have an approach, and that's allowed us to move forward with some of our studies done in collaboration with BMS.
Give us a website where we can learn more about the developments at Eisai.
Thank you, Neil. The best website is us.eisai.com, and Eisai is spelled E-I-S-A-I.
Richard, thank you so much for sharing some of your time with us this evening here on Health Professional Radio. Thank you.
It's my pleasure, Neil. Thank you for your interest and time.
You've been listening to Health Professional Radio. I'm your host, Neil Howard, in conversation with Dr. Richard Woodman, Chief Clinical Officer, Oncology Business Group at Eisai. Audio copies of this program are available at hpr.fm and healthprofessionalradio.com.au. You can also subscribe to the podcast on iTunes, listen in, download at SoundCloud, and be sure and subscribe to our YouTube channel at youtube.com/Health Professional Radio.